Inside every logic chip ever made, the one in your phone, your laptop, the server running the artificial intelligence model you used this morning, there are thousands of tiny metal cylinders called contact plugs. Each one is narrower than a coronavirus. Nearly all of them are made of tungsten. And as of a law reported to have taken effect in early 2026, roughly 15 companies in the world are legally cleared to sell it. You might assume this is another gallium story. A headline restriction that turns out to be porous, that the market routes around in 6 months. It isn't. And the reason it isn't is where this goes. Tungsten isn't a niche input for one specialized process. It is the contact metal in the stack that connects transistors to the wiring above them, present at every process node, from the mature chips in your car's safety sensors to the leading-edge chips in frontier artificial intelligence hardware. Applied Materials, the largest semiconductor equipment company on Earth, builds the deposition tools that put it there. Those tools need a specific gas, not bulk metal. And that gas has its own supply chain most people have never looked at. The tools that deposit tungsten need tungsten hexafluoride, and tungsten hexafluoride starts as Chinese ore. By the time you've followed this from the transistor to the exporter, you'll understand exactly what tungsten does inside the chip, why China's refining position isn't just a market share number, but a physical precondition, and what a whitelist of 15 approved sellers actually means for every fab that isn't in China. The whitelist names roughly 15 firms. What makes a firm eligible? And what happens to buyers who can't reach one of them? That question runs underneath everything that follows. This isn't really a story about a metal. It's a story about who controls the gate, and what happens when a gate replaces a market. To understand why the gate is real, you have to start where the tungsten actually lives, inside the chip itself. Tungsten has the highest melting point of any metal, approximately 3,400 degrees Celsius. That number needs to be felt, not just heard. Copper melts below 1,100 degrees, aluminum below 700. At the transistor contact level, where a chip cycles through thermal stress thousands of times during fabrication, copper and aluminum don't just underperform, they migrate. They diffuse into the silicon and destroy the device. Tungsten doesn't. It sits there at temperatures that would vaporize your kitchen, holding its shape, holding its conductivity, making the electrical connection that lets the transistor actually talk to the rest of the chip. The contact plug is the vertical conductor connecting the transistor's source, drain, and gate to the first metal interconnect layer above. Think of it as the last inch of plumbing between the water main and your tap. Everything above can be copper. The long horizontal wires running across the chip use copper for its low resistance. But that last connection, running through thermally stressed material under fabrication conditions, needs something that won't corrode or migrate. Tungsten is that fitting. Applied Materials Endura platform is the industry-standard tool for depositing it, a machine inside virtually every major logic fab on Earth. Some leading-edge nodes are now experimenting with molybdenum as a contact metal. It has similar thermal properties, and there's genuine interest in it at the bleeding edge of process development. But molybdenum substitution is early stage, not confirmed at volume production at any node, and it does not address the bulk of global chip production running on mature processes. Tungsten stays in the stack for the overwhelming majority of chips made today, and will for years, so the fabs need it, not as a chunk of metal, but in a very specific form. The deposition step that places tungsten into those contact plugs doesn't use solid tungsten wire or powder. It uses tungsten hexafluoride, written as a combination of tungsten and fluorine, produced by reacting refined tungsten metal with fluorine gas. It's corrosive, toxic, and must arrive at the fab at semiconductor grade, meaning impurity levels measured in parts per billion. A single contamination event in the gas supply can ruin wafers worth millions of dollars. Getting from ore in the ground to semiconductor-grade tungsten hexafluoride is a multi-step chain. Mined ore becomes concentrate. Concentrate becomes ammonium paratungstate, the key intermediate in the refining sequence, known in the industry as the step that determines everything downstream. Ammonium paratungstate becomes tungsten metal powder. Tungsten metal powder becomes tungsten hexafluoride. Each step requires specialized equipment and chemistry. The chain is long, the tolerances at the end are extreme, and the bulk of it runs through China. Think of ammonium paratungstate as the refined flour before the bread. You can bake tungsten hexafluoride anywhere in the world, technically. There are producers in Japan, including Resonac, and in the United States, including Air Products. But if most of the world's flour mill capacity is in one country, the baker's independence is narrower than it looks. These non-Chinese producers exist. They provide a partial buffer. But their feedstock supply chain runs significantly through Chinese ammonium paratungstate. The precise share isn't confirmed in open sources at the level of individual sourcing contracts, but the dependency is widely noted in industry analysis. If the supply of ammonium paratungstate tightens upstream, the tungsten hexafluoride producers outside China face a feedstock problem, not just a price problem. The gate doesn't need to be airtight to be consequential. And now the whitelist arrives on top of all of that. By most analyst estimates, China accounts for roughly 80% or more of global tungsten mine production, with the remainder distributed across Vietnam, Russia, Bolivia, and a handful of other countries. But mining share alone understates the concentration. The refining position is even more pronounced. Countries with tungsten deposits, Canada, Portugal, Australia, have historically shipped concentrate to Chinese processors because the processing infrastructure exists there at scale and at lower cost than anywhere else. Building equivalent ammonium, paratungstate, and tungsten hexafluoride refining capacity outside China is a multi-year, capital-intensive project. The United States, the European Union, and Japan have announced programs to develop domestic tungsten supply chains. Confirmed production at semiconductor grade and meaningful scale has not been reported. The gap between announced and operating is measured in years, not quarters. Having a tungsten deposit without refining infrastructure is like owning a wheat field with no mill within 1,000 miles. The crop is real. The path to bread isn't, not yet, and not fast. Which brings us to the gate itself. Under a supply chain security law reported as taking effect in early 2026, a whitelist of approximately 15 companies was designated as approved sellers of tungsten for export from China. The precise text of this law and the confirmed count of approved firms are not independently verified in open sources at this script's factual boundary. That must be stated plainly. What is reported is the mechanism, a named list of firms cleared to transact, rather than a cap on total volume. That distinction matters more than it might sound. A quota is a nightclub with a capacity limit. Volume gets managed, prices adjust. Buyers shop around among multiple sellers to find allocation. A whitelist is a nightclub with a guest list, and capacity doesn't matter if your name isn't on it. A buyer outside China who needs tungsten or tungsten hexafluoride must be able to source from a whitelisted seller. If those whitelisted sellers don't sell to you, for commercial reasons, for administrative reasons, for reasons that are never formally stated, there is no legal Chinese alternative. The gate doesn't ask how much you need. It asks whether you're cleared. The honest caveat here is important. We don't know with certainty, from open sources, that this law operates precisely as described. What can be confirmed is the physical concentration underneath it, and that if such a law operates as reported, the structure it creates is plausible precisely because the physical leverage is real. The concentration is confirmed. The whitelist is reported. Both matter, even if one of them is waiting on independent verification. Here is what that means for the equipment makers and the fabs. Applied Materials is the world's largest semiconductor equipment company by revenue. Its Endura platform is inside virtually every major logic fab. Those tools consume tungsten hexafluoride. Applied Materials does not mine or refine tungsten. It buys tungsten hexafluoride through the specialty gas supply chain, the same chain that runs back through Chinese ammonium paratungstate. A restriction on who may legally export tungsten-derived precursors from China does not target Applied Materials directly. It operates upstream of the tool sale. But the fabs that buy Applied Materials tools and then need to source tungsten hexafluoride to run them are exposed. TSMC's Arizona fabs, Intel's Ohio and Germany expansions, Samsung's Texas plant. All of these are being built in the expectation of access to the global specialty gas supply chain, of which tungsten precursors are a component. Confirmed tungsten hexafluoride sourcing contracts for any of these facilities aren't publicly available in open sources. What is clear is the assumption embedded in the construction itself, that the material layer will be someone else's logistics problem. The equipment maker sells you the oven. The specialty gas supplier sells you the gas. If the law operates as reported, the whitelist controls who sells the gas. If you built the bakery assuming the gas supply was handled downstream, you've just discovered it isn't. Fabs almost certainly began stockpiling critical materials after China's 2023 export controls on gallium, germanium, and graphite. That's standard supply chain risk management after a warning shot. Stockpiling buys time. Months, perhaps. It doesn't change the existence of the gate or the structure of who controls it. The pattern across these materials is now legible. Tungsten follows gallium, germanium, and graphite. Materials where China's share of processing, not just mining, exceeds what open market dynamics alone explain, and where administrative controls can be layered on top of that physical position. The 2023 controls were export quotas and licensing requirements. A whitelist is something more precise. It doesn't cap volume. It designates who may transact at all. That makes it structurally harder to challenge internationally. An embargo invites challenge at the World Trade Organization and generates political retaliation. An approved seller list is a domestic regulatory framework, quiet, self-reinforcing, and administratively deniable as anything other than routine supply chain governance. Here is my honest read. The triumphalist version of this story is that China has already locked the world's chip supply behind a gate it can close at will, and that semiconductor production outside China is now running on borrowed time. That's not what the evidence shows. The whitelist is reported, not confirmed. Non-Chinese tungsten hexafluoride production exists. The gate, even if real, has not been visibly used to cut off supply to any named buyer. Chip production has not been materially disrupted. None of that has happened. The dismissive version is that physical concentration is a market fact that will self-correct once Western investment scales up, that no rational actor would risk the economic blowback of actually using this lever, and that the whitelist is a paper restriction that will dissolve under commercial pressure. That's not what the evidence supports either. The gap between Western alternatives being announced and those alternatives operating at semiconductor grade at meaningful scale is measured in years. Administrative approval lists don't require an embargo to have effect. The uncertainty alone reshapes how fabs plan, how insurers price risk, and how governments allocate investment. The gate can be doing strategic work for Beijing without ever being visibly closed. My honest read is this: China has quietly moved the tungsten choke point from a market share number to an administrative approval structure. If the whitelist is confirmed as reported, the structure it creates is the most precise instrument in this category yet. Not a wall, not an embargo, but a gate with a guest list. Every fab expansion outside China, in Arizona, Ohio, Germany, Japan, is being built on the assumption that the gate stays open or that someone else is managing the risk. The whitelist makes that assumption explicit and fragile. Here is what I want your honest read on. Does the physical concentration underneath the reported whitelist make it a durable strategic instrument? One that Western investment cannot close within a strategically relevant time frame? Or does the combination of market incentives and government programs route around the gate within a decade before it's ever seriously used? One side says the gate is real, the timeline to build alternatives is too long to matter, and the gap between announced and operating does enormous strategic work in Beijing's favor without requiring any action. The other side says market incentives plus government funding will develop alternative tungsten refining capacity before the gate is ever closed on a major buyer, making the whitelist a paper threat. Which do you think is right? And what would it take to change your mind? Tell me in the comments. If you want to follow how this material story develops, whether the whitelist gets independently confirmed, whether Western tungsten alternatives arrive on schedule, and what the next hidden layer in this stack looks like, subscribe. That is what this channel tracks. One contact plug. Narrower than a virus. Sitting inside every chip you own. The gate to the material it is made from has about 15 names on the approved list. Now you know where the list comes from and whose stamp it carries.